Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Today is October 27th, and this is another of our bi-weekly SIG Apps calls. My name is Maciej, and together with Janet, we are going to host today's call. Quick announcements. We are going to cancel the next instance of SIG Apps call. That's because it is happening during the week when KubeCon is happening in Atlanta. We are really hoping to see some of you, or ideally all of you, in Atlanta. We will be having a session there with Janet, so feel free to jump and say hi or ask questions, whatever feels like you want to do. Another important announcement is that the 135 code freeze is quickly approaching. It is due next Thursday at the end of the day. It's November 6th, end of the day anywhere on Earth, which means, if I remember correctly, that's somewhere around noon UTC. So that means that that covers all of our announcements, and I'm not seeing Andre, so I'm gonna bump it over. Oh, there's Andre. Literally, I was as I was calling him out. Andre, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, sorry guys, just joined late. Just give me 1 minute.
No worries, no worries. Kevin mentioned that you'll be a minute late. Hold on, let me stop sharing, and you should now be able to share your screen. We literally just called your name, so you're right on time.
Do we have any other topics on the agenda today to talk about?
Yes, we have other topics. Do you wanna?
Yeah, we can start with that and I can talk about stateful job sets.
Okay.
That works.
So let's start with Marcus in that case. Marcus, you wanna walk us through your topic?
Sure. I can share the
You should be
screen.
able, yeah, you should be able to share your screen by now.
Let's see. All right, everyone can see the screen. Um,
Yes. Now I can see it.
Great. I guess the screen isn't too important because I also shared the link to this in the talk. But yeah, I'm just gonna talk about this proposal that I have. It's just to get some like initial feedback and see what people think. So basically, if I don't know if people are familiar with the workload API and the plans for gang scheduling of pods, but basically there's a plan which I think is currently has like a PR out to start implementing for the workload API. But there's going to be a system for multi-pod replicas where like instead of each pod being a replica, you have groups of pods that act together as like a single superpod. Um, so this proposal is basically for the pod disruption budget for the eviction API to be able to accommodate for multi-pod replicas where you don't want to be disrupting like a bunch of different replicas by disrupting like one pod in each replica. Because if you have like in some systems, you have like each pod group. The health depends on the health of each pod. So like if any pod in the group gets disrupted, then the whole group is disrupted. And we want to be able to take that into account when calculating availability for the pod disruption budget. Yeah, so the way we would do this is first we add like a field to the PDB spec to enable it, just so that there's no behavior change that is kind of like silently enabled. And basically we want to have if the field is enabled, we want the PDB's min available or max unavailable disruption budget to count the pod groups instead of individual pods. The pod groups are determined in the workload object that is being added, which will just have like a list of pod groups in it. And each pod that is part of one of those will reference back to the workload object. So you can see the intended number of pod groups and the intended size of each pod group to determine the health of them. I don't know how much time we have or how much detail I should go into, but yeah.
We have some time, so feel free to go a little bit more into details. But I can roughly get the picture. I don't know if anyone else has any particular questions. So, but yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I did put a link to this in the meeting notes doc. But
Oh, Kevin has some question. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I think this is very relevant, and thank you for bringing this up. And I skimmed the doc, and it's very well done. The one issue I see is that as of the moment, leader worker set does not yet implement this API.
I saw
workload
that
API.
There's also a plan for that. I don't have the link for it right now, but I was
No, that's all right.
meant to integrate.
It might be worth calling that one out also, because also I guess, yeah, I mean, yeah, because that would be,
Yeah,
I know a lot of this we're building off of what we expect to go in for alpha for the workloads in 1.35, and then also once that is there, leader worker set, and then I guess the questions come up around, like, if we add this as pod disruption budget for workload, it's going to be dependent on alpha API, and it might be worth, like, I don't know, like, how that, what SIG apps policy would be on that for like the API, like API graduations for these can kind of get very tricky to support, and I'm not too sure for the pod disruption budget, like if there is a need for this to be like a beta or an alpha level API in tandem with workloads, so that we, like, if the workload API changes, like, we don't want to break the APIs, but the workload API itself is also alpha. Sorry, I'll let Nachek go.
Yeah, I'm guessing that first of all, the workload API will be alpha in 135 if all goes well with the overall scheduling gang scheduling enhancement. So I'm hoping that will move forward in 135 eventually, early 136. I have some doubts around the actual ordering, how we should plan it out correctly to ensure that the moment we start expanding the PDB API, the gang scheduling is beta, and that basically means it is on by default. Because if I remember correctly, the gang scheduling, the workload API bits are currently modifying the pod spec.
Yes.
Because that's where you have information about, oh, I'm part of this particular workload group. I'm not sure about the workload resource itself. Because if I remember correctly, that was part of the scheduling, one of the scheduling APIs. I can't remember which group eventually it landed, or I haven't looked the implementation. I can't remember. So we'll have to look through that because I'm guessing that we still need to be able to say, because the workload API and the pod spec, those two closely correlate with regards to what constitutes a group of pods. And that logic will have to be then repeated again in the eviction logic to be able to navigate both the information from within the pod and from within the workload specification. Which pods, because there is a possibility to specify several subgroups, and if I remember correctly, there were like 3 levels. There was subgroups, and then there was something below groups again. If I remember correctly, that from the scheduling cap. So all that logic will have to be then replicated in the eviction such that the eviction logic can properly account the pods. The design itself seems reasonable. I can see the benefit of that. I'm guessing the only question is, when are you thinking to push this through?
We were thinking like 136. I don't really know how the release schedule works. This is kind of reliant on the workload API. So we would want
Yeah,
that to
exactly. Exactly. That's probably the biggest unknown, and the actual implementation. I mean, I don't see a reason why we would not accept the cap for 136, but the actual implementation and when this will be allowed to land will depend on the other APIs that are available and exposed in Cube. That's roughly my thinking from it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you very much. Just make sure to remind us about this topic again early in 136, so that you get the reviews, or even before that, so that you can go through the reviews and make sure that the topic is pushed forward before the actual release starts. Cool, awesome. Thank you very much. Andre, you ready for your topic?
Yeah, sure. Let's quickly talk about it.
Go ahead.
Just share my screen. Hi everyone, by the way, I'm Andre. I think I didn't get a chance to join these calls, but I mostly work in the batch working group and also in the Kubeflow community. Been there for the last 7 years, maintaining different project across cloud native ecosystems. And right now we're working on some job set enhancement to make sure, this workload address several kind of key features we want to have for distributed training. So I think, like, again, we kind of try to bring on this topic to the SIG apps because we already have the same kind of API on other workloads like stateful sets and also leader worker set. But I think the rough idea is to allow users to managing persistent volume claims via the job API. And we kind of like already have this kind of open, just to give it a little bit of a background, we do have some open issues for a while, like for example, stateful index jobs, which kind of like we try to support volume claim policies on the job API. And we also do have the same issue in a job set. So this kind of issue in a job controller right now is not been yet fixed. And we're trying to see how we can start to do some work on the job set side to give users some sort of, initial value before we have this API on the job side. But I think the long-term goal, if users find this useful, we might want to also have the similar API capabilities on the job controller API. And again, like the similar to stateful sets, we want to have ability to orchestrate volume claims as part of the job set workload orchestration. And let me just maybe open the API design so we can go to the details. Yeah, so again, the initial goal is to make it very simple, maybe then extend. So because there are kind of, should job set, support multiple layers of orchestration. We like do have to, this is one of the examples how the job set might look like. It might have like, multiple replicated job. So every job might have multiple replicas. And also every replicated job might have multiple replicas. And then every job also have the parallelism and completion parameter which you can adjust to define how many pods you want to create per every job. So which means like you have like, one replicated job and have multiple replicas, and every replica might have multiple pods. So in reality, like, we can find in multiple ways how volumes can be created. But I think as we discussed last time on the batch working group call, we want to kind of limit initial support to only allow folks to kind of orchestrate single volumes for the entire job sets. So again, like we want to create a new API called volume claim policies. And in this API, similar to stateful set, user define a list of volume claims, which will going to be created. And then those claims will be attached to the replicated job, which has the appropriate volume amounts. Like for example, in this particular example, we do have three replicated jobs. And we want to create one PVC called initializer. And we want to attach this PVC to dataset initializer, model initializer, and the node replicated job, which means we're going to have a single PVC, which will be attached to to all of the replicated jobs by the controller. And this PVC, the orchestration will be handled by the job set operator. Again, feel free to raise your hand and ask any follow-up questions. I can also go to other examples that we talking about. So the kind of like the main kind of use case we found here is to there are multiple times when folks might want to kind of share the volume between the replicated jobs. Like for example, in this particular use case, we do have initializer job. We also do have the node job, and maybe users want to kind of prefetch the assets on the initializer step and then use these assets in the trainer step. And of course, like you can have like third-party controller which orchestrate these volumes, but we want to give them this capability within job set, so they don't really need to worry about how to managing those volumes and how to share assets. And it could be also like other use cases, like for example, managing I think I had this use case too, managing the checkpoints that your jobs might generate, and then you might use this PVC for other use cases like interactive access to your models or interactive access to your job results. So this also might be useful. Yeah, so I think like maybe two things to say here. We want to define a retention policy. So similar to how we said it's in the stateful set, like in stateful set, the retention policies, the default is, I think, retain. So here we do want to have defined retention policy as delete, because the batch job comes slightly different compared to stateful sets. And we want to make sure by default we're going to delete all those assets so users don't have any kind of wasted resources. By default, they don't want to have on their cluster. Yeah, so the rough, the high level implementation of OPI looks like this. Job set spec has the volume claim policy, then volume claim policy define a template and the retention policy, and we do have the delete or retain retention policy that user can select to. Yeah, so any kind of, Kevin, do you want me to go to the other details here before we can jump to the questions and discussions?
Sorry, don't interrupt me. I think this is good. I mean, yeah, part of the reason why I asked him to take it here is like I reviewed the KEP from the job set side, and it looks sensible to me. But I was curious from the SIG app side if I know that we've added functionality like this for stateful set, and I was wondering like from looking at this from that perspective would be helpful. Like what problems we ran into with stateful set, or like what are some things we want to think about for the API, especially around the cleanup PVCs and making sure that we don't overload the system. And also, one of our goals is to eventually, we kind of want to build this in job set first, and then ideally, if this is a value, maybe potentially propose something similar to a stateful index job. So that was kind of what we were thinking about for this KEP. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I think maybe any kind of findings you gather from stateful set orchestration or any kind of users feedback on this API. I think this will be super helpful for us to understand.
I will openly say that I haven't heard any major complaints about the functionality that we've added. If I remember correctly from the conversation that I've been having over the years, we don't have that many users leveraging those additional retention policies. Most usually just use the basic primitives for ensuring the volumes are maintained. Um, but I don't recall any specific gotchas that we run into that were somewhat problematic. I mean, other than the usual things that just show up during the implementation or testing that are caused by issues or some minor glitches, but I don't recall any major obstacles that we've run into when this was implemented. So I don't have anything for that. For the index side of things, I'm not 100% sure. I'm a little bit worried that the index side of the jobs is growing a little bit heavy on the API side of things. It's pretty big by now, if I remember correctly, and a lot of the functionality is tightly coupled with one or the other functionality of a job.
Mm.
I really like that you are actually trying it out outside of the core, and the implementation that you're proposing, mostly the API side of things, that looks very clean and I cannot think of anything that I could suggest um, other than what you already have there. So I don't know if
Yeah, I guess like yeah,
Huh?
I guess the question from the stateful set side, do we know like because I know there are custom operators to manage volumes. I think there are volume operator right exist, and some users might still leveraging this, or users might have their own kind of way to managing the volumes. Do we have any metrics to see other API was introduced if this actually been used in production for some of the users? Um,
No, we don't have any insights like that, sadly. At most, what people are reporting through various
mhm.
issues or something like that, but we don't have any visibility into what people are have globally deployed in their clusters from a project standpoint.
I guess one of the things we're wondering about for this API is like, so for like an index job, like for example, would it make sense that every instance of an index job have its own PVC, or would we want to kind of have all of the pods of a job, an index job, kind of sharing the same PVC? Because that's kind of like what we're sort of going back and forth with on the stateful set or stateful job set is like whether or not like these replicas of these jobs should have their own designated persistent volume, or should it all kind of be like a shared persistent volume for the entire job set?
yeah, yeah, just to give a little bit of context. I think initially we kind of like proposed to introduce the target job to the volume client policy API. I think I might have this somewhere. Um, yeah, let me maybe show you. So basically, what Kevin is saying, like we can have two ways of how we can share the volume. It could be per index, or it could be a shared volume. And I think initially we were thinking about whether maybe we should support both, because might be use cases within the stateful set. You might want to create PVC for every index, or for every kind of pod this replicated job will be created. But we kind of like end up with maybe we should start with shared, and then like figure out whether users might want to have more granular API on the index side, right?
Um, I mean, you could do something similar to what we have with And then the pod template, and you could just reference by volume claim name,
Hmm.
whether you're doing with just single one, everything just uses the same thing. But if you have multiples, I'm trying to figure out a way to be able to satisfy both use cases because theoretically, I can see examples for both use cases being reasonable in some cases.
Yeah, I think that the trick would be if we do support only shared volume, your storage class must support read kind of like multiple attachments,
Yeah,
which means like your
exactly.
code must be on the same node group, or you must
Yeah.
support, read only many or read write many, which kind of a limitation for some of the use cases, I would say. But if we kind of like thinking, yeah, uh, I'm not sure about, we're speaking a lot about, topology or scheduling, where you want to place the job on a specific part of the rack. I don't know, like if we do know how folks leveraging volumes there, like, do we know if actually the file system on those types of data centers are kind of shared, or it's all over the place for different kind of cloud providers right now these days? Um,
I think it's going to be the latter. I don't think
okay.
there's much standard of storage, at least from what I'm not really I guess I can't speak from a provider standpoint, but from what I hear in upstream, all this sounds to be kind of a little bit wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if you could just introduce additional policy field, which would allow users to specify either of those two approaches and make one of them the default. Maybe one by one would be the default. And then eventually, if you decide to just replicate that, especially given what Kevin just said, where the ability to share volumes between different providers is not that common. So starting with the default being each pod has its own template, a volume claim template. And then if you decide to have a little bit more sophisticated use cases, introduce some kind of like policy that will allow you to do that. I don't know if it's worth it in the first place.
Yeah, like I think like so the primary use case right now is have shared volumes because I think
Mm,
that we kind of like, we discussed we want to go to the opposite row. So like I think initial idea was to introduce target replicated job API, which says like if the target replicated job API is set, that will create the PVC for every index in this replicated job. And if it's doesn't set, like it's basically have a shared volume, which will have, volume you can attach to the every volume claim. And we don't want to use target replicated job initially because we don't have use case when PVC should be created per index, right? And so we want to start with something, maybe shared and then go
mm.
towards adding this API in the future to make sure they're backward compatible, right? Um, yeah, because the thing is like, as you said, like I think there is a way to uh, use this approach for per volume claim PVC if you, for example, use subfolders. But yes, you have this limitation of, multiple attachment you should support, but you can still leverage, like multiple, for example, subfolders on your volume, right, per index. And you can have a multiple subfolders for every index for your pod, and then you have a checkpointing there. Yeah, but
But
maybe, yeah,
that
good.
doesn't make you any different than just having each index having their own volume, basically. The only benefit is that if you're thinking about then um, doing some kind of aggregation across all those directories, then yes, having a single point would definitely a single volume would make it easier. The question is there a step at the end that requires all of them to be available in a single place? And there's
Mhm.
also always the downside of, oh, if one volume goes down, everything basically is lost. Versus if a single index fail, only that particular index will be repeated,
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. Um,
which was one of the drivers behind the index job. So
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. I kind of like want to understand more from the use case from the job perspective when, like, what is the use case when you need to have a volume per index? Uh, because it's kind of like our imaginable use cases, I would say. Because
mhm.
I mean, you can definitely, for example, store your model in your blob storage, right? You don't want to use PVC, or I mean, if you think about uh, distributed training, you don't really need to attach the volume to all of your workers, all of your nodes. You might want to have a, the master node, and master node will just basically perform the checkpointing to your volume claim. I know that NHPC there are more use cases when kind of pair index attachment is required and is essential. But I think we haven't really reached consensus yet there. Um, Yeah, like if we know any kind of use cases when this is useful, we should definitely maybe explore them. Like, I think my question is like, will it be a breaking change if we don't introduce pair index PVC initially? Um, what do we think of this?
I,
I'm okay with, I mean, I guess for jobs that I'm open to be a bit more flexible, and we can, like, maybe if we have questions about I would like us to go for the tangible use cases, and we can keep in mind the API, but if we get those, it's probably, I mean, I guess it does suck about deprecating APIs, but uh it sounds like we're not as sure. Like, I mean, there's a reason why that stateful index job was created, but it hasn't been fully uh I don't think anyone's really fleshed out that idea. So I don't know if maybe designing that one in mind, like for the eventual goal that this will be included, is maybe the best approach, because I guess it does look like some people are mentioning it here, but I don't know if I haven't heard of much investigation on this other than the issue here.
Yeah, one of the idea could be to, introduce targeted replicated job initially, but doesn't allow you to set anything there, and always have an empty list. And eventually, similar to what we've done for the Penson API, initially we support only a single element in the slice, which only allows you to depend on a single replicated job, and then we extend it to support multiple items in a slice. If you think that eventually we want to migrate to this pair index volume orchestration.
Yeah, we can follow up on
Okay.
the issue on the API, but I think for this call, it sounds like there's nothing too concerning about this. So I think we can think more about the API on the KEP.
Yeah. I think maybe just one follow-up question from the SIG Apps perspective. On the job controller side, like, do you see eventually we will kind of extend the job API to support this, or like what are your thoughts on this?
I don't have any clear answer at this point in time yet.
Mhm.
Like I was saying, the job API already is pretty big. On one hand, I can see some use cases and the ability to expand. On the other hand, we need to make sure that we're not expanding the API in perpetuity and just adding there more functionality. So it's basically we'll have to figure it out at one point in time eventually. Do we want to add it or not? I'm surprised at the stateful index job because I'm pretty sure that there were topics, something along this earlier than that particular issue that you opened, but I cannot find it. maybe the index job, and there are some use cases from when the original index job was mentioned, because I remember that being very early on. Okay, I found. So the original index job goes back to 2015.
Mm.
That's issue 14188.
Do you mind sharing in the chat? We can open.
I dropped it in the chat. Maybe there are some useful topics or suggestions that people were thinking at the time. That might be helpful for you to drive the decision one way or the other.
Yep.
Eventually, it can potentially help with making some decisions. But
Yeah, I
that's
think
roughly what I would
yeah.
probably try, looking through older issues, because that's where some information will be living. But like I said, for jobs, it's hard to say at this point in time one way or the other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's super helpful. Let's definitely take a look and explore, like, because I think index jobs, I mean, they're not really too old, right, to be J. So it is a new
Mhm.
thing. Maybe we can see, see if there are any kind of user, asks to support it, because I think like the job sets open much more possibilities what you can do compared to jobs, especially when you have multiple like layers of replication, and you have like multiple jobs. You can build sequences, and like I think it's kind of like give you ability to have more similar to what I think we heard from the HPC world type of things, because they also support job sequencings, at least what we heard in the batch work calls. They do support like multiple like API type of orchestration, and there are a lot of kind of more complex scenarios you can think of. Rather than the job site, you unfortunately only have a single pod template, and the only way you can scale it is to adjust the replicas, right? That's pretty much it. That is why I guess like the job site opened much more kind of variety of use cases for us, right, to work with. Yeah, but I think that let's definitely explore and see if there is something we can learn from for the job site.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Thanks a lot for
Anything
bringing
else?
up this
Yeah,
topic.
anyone add here?
Yeah, thank you for bringing it up, Andre. That's all.
Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback. I think it's super useful for us. Let's definitely follow up on this, and let's see, after we having this initial implementation job site, what we can, do as a follow up for this. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Kevin, your last
Yeah,
topic, a request for
a
review.
very quick one. Just I'm the forgot what I called the title. The mutable job pod resources. I have an implementation up. I did not get all of the beta feedback from Janet, but I was hoping to kind of like I have the meat of the functionality is implemented. There are still some test cases, but those are part of I think for beta. So I was hoping to maybe get a review and then maybe iterate on some of those for the beta next release.
I have that PR lined up. I was really hoping that I'll get there today, but I've run out of time. So I'm hoping to get there tomorrow. So
As long as it's on your radar, that's perfectly fine. Thank you.
it's there. It's very high on over there. Cool. I guess that was the last topic. Any last minute items folks have? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, everyone. And whoever will be present in Atlanta, see you at KubeCon, and I'll see the rest of you in a little bit over in 4 weeks, if I'm counting correctly. Cool. Thank you very much. See y'all.
Thanks.